your Sacramento Art Revolution and better housing situation. We still have de facto but very real racial segregation of housing in Sacramento as a result of historic racist practices. The 1968 Fair Housing Act. The 1968 Fair Housing Act is seldom enforced anywhere. And old habits of discrimination and racial exclusion are perpetuated and taken for granted. New forms of predatory home lending have also reinforced the patterns of segregation and resegregation. Racial segregation of housing and residential demographics produce overwhelming array of factors that negatively impact the quality of life for the people in our neighborhoods that are subject to these historic and ongoing forces of exclusion. These factors negatively impact the quality of life in pretty much every relevant aspect. I speak in generalities and I ask your pardon because we don't have time to go into details, or I could and I would. Thank you. We don't have time to go into details, or I could and would. Thank you.
The next speaker is Suzanne Hastings. Following Ms. Hastings is Ed Harris.
Good afternoon. So what we see is a pernicious negative feedback loop of distress and poverty that makes it particularly difficult for people to move out and escape from segregated neighborhoods. So what we see is a pernicious negative feedback loop of distress and poverty that makes it particularly difficult for people to move out or escape from segregated neighborhoods. Gentrification only makes the situation so much worse. For most people, a few lucky souls may profit at this point if they own property, and now the value goes up. But for most people, mostly tenants, far from being liberated from their distressed neighborhoods, they are being displaced by rising rents and forced to relocate to more remote, more marginalized housing, subjected to exclusion by an ever more unaffordable housing market and such covert and informal forms of discrimination as continue to perpetuate, as we know they do, whether consciously or unconsciously. Of course, people may simply just end up homeless. The point is, in this housing market, with a city policy that offers so little provision of affordable housing and always in isolated, remote areas, no mixed income housing is offered. So structural racism is perpetuated and compounded. The statistically proven extreme inequality of wealth, income, and material well-being of Black and white Americans has not improved in the 50 years since the Fair Housing Act was signed into law. With the housing policy you are pursuing, how can this inequality ever change? Gentrification is not revitalization. It's people being forced out of where they live into ever more difficult or desperate circumstances of trying to live. Gentrification is a spatial expression of inequality. Expression of inequality. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ed Harris. Following Mr. Harris is D. Eric G.
This is more than just to the material detriment of African Americans and other people of color. It is to the profound social and psychological harm of people born into a legacy.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council. This is more than just to the material detriment of African Americans and other people of color. It is to the profound social and psychological harm of people born into a legacy of unimaginable injustice and suffering. To explain this, I need a quote from Daniel Patrick Moynihan from some 52 years ago, that Black Americans have survived it all is extraordinary. A lesser people would have simply died out, as indeed others have. But it may not be supposed that the African American community has not paid a fearful price for the incredible mistreatment to which it has been subjected to for the past 3 centuries. Well, I don't believe in greater or lesser peoples. Moynihan was speaking in a different time in a way we wouldn't speak now. But I still find in this quote a critical insight here. Thank you.
But I still find in this quote a critical insight here. Thank you. Thank you.
D. Eric G.
On top of everything else, says that there's some kind of psychological warfare being waged against African Americans in particular. An assault not only on their physical beings and material lives, but on their emotional and psychic resources.
On top of everything else, it's as if there is a kind of psychological warfare being waged against African Americans in particular, an assault not only on their physical beings and material lives, but on the emotional and psychic resources, an assault on their very ability to understand what is being done to them and to understand themselves as human beings. It is an assault on the very sanity and will to survive of individuals and of great and enduring communities of individuals. And this is in the very nature of what we call structural racism. And all of this is structural racism, a kind of racism that seems to go on and on of its own momentum, a kind of racism which you may perpetuate through your housing policy, while all of you thinking of yourselves not to be racist at all.
The kind of racism which you may perpetuate through your housing policy, while all of you thinking yourselves not to be racist at all. Thank you.
Les White.
Of course, we understand that objectively, you must see this as in your interest. Of course, I understand that objectively, you must see it in your interest to have rent costs go up, even apparently out of control. It means property values in your city and your districts increase. And if poor and working class and even middle class people are forced out of your districts, they're displaced by more affluent constituents. And absentee property owners and speculators who can contribute to your campaign funds, your special projects, your NGOs, and branded organizations. All of this is very good for your careers. And eventually, maybe even your bank accounts. I understand you want to get on in the world. Fine. I'm guessing no one up there on the dais before me now thinks of themselves as a white supremacist or a racist, or is eagerly willing to enable racism. That's absurd, right? But now consider, when 400 or 200 years ago, when some white people set out to assault and murder and enslave black human beings, I should think some of them, many of them, did not personally believe racist doctrines, did not hold racist ideas in their minds, felt no particular hatred towards the people whose lives they were destroying, and they assumed no right of natural superiority to them. They simply saw the means to benefit their careers and bank accounts, to prosper in the world. But what they did created and propagated racism and untold suffering. Were they better or worse than those who acted and did these things out of racist beliefs? Does it matter? Or does it matter?
And last speaker that matters not on the agenda is Michael Hansen.
Thank you. Does what we have described now seem a very different and strange way of understanding our history and how our world and our city, Sacramento, how it works? Does what we have described now seem like a very different and strange way of understanding our history and how our world and our city, Sacramento, how it works? But we believe that for thoughtful people, this way of understanding things is becoming inevitable We ask you to be thoughtful people. How will you be remembered? I would not want to be remembered as another petty enemy of justice, enemy of solidarity, and enemy of human empathy. I would rather be forgotten by history, forgotten by everyone I know and everyone I love, than to be remembered like that. How do you think you will be remembered? Thank you for your time and patience. I would rather be forgotten by history, forgotten by everyone I know and everyone I love, than to be remembered like that. How would you like to be remembered? We thank you for your time and patience.
Thank you all very, very much for coming to testify and for sharing your testimony in an intelligent way. Appreciate it. Okay. Those are the items, public testimony items not on the agenda. This